If someone had asked me how control feels, I would have said a firm grip. I was wrong. It feels like silence, and a cursor that moves when you're not touching the mouse. I hadn't noticed it at first. A small flicker on the screen. My spreadsheet shivered just for a second, and the mouse seemed to jump on its own. I stared at it blinking, slowly, willing it to stop behaving like a ghost. It did, and I convinced myself it was nothing. I was wrong. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. My half-drunk coffee had gone cold forgotten beside the keyboard. Outside early autumn sun poured through the blinds of my Evanston apartment, catching in the dust motes that danced like secrets in the air. It was supposed to be just another work morning. Clean numbers, clear goals. I'd left my corporate job to freelance, to get away from the suffocation of family expectations. But this felt worse than suffocating. This felt violated. I reopened the Chase business tab. The number stared back at me like a smirk, $1,800 withdrawn. Authorized maintenance, WHT Inc. I hadn't approved any maintenance. WHT. Whitmore Holdings and Trust was the shell company my father used to clean his hands of real decision-making. I hadn't seen that acronym since I was 18 and smart enough to think I could outgrow it. I clicked details. The timestamp lined up exactly with the moment I'd stepped out for groceries yesterday. My fingers trembled as I hit the bank's hotline. The woman on the other end was polite, almost robotic. Yes, Ms. Whitmore, this was a secure transaction originating from your registered IP. Device fingerprint matches as well. Is there anything else I can help you with? Yeah, I said through my teeth. Tell me how my device made a transaction while I was in line at Walgreens. Silence. I hung up before she could offer another canned response. I texted Celeste. Me. Something's off. $1,800 gone. Bank says it's from my device. Celeste. That's not right. Run malware snare. I sent you the link. Me. You think it's a virus, Celeste. No. I think it's someone. Her words slammed through me harder than I expected. I stared at the screen for a long beat, then clicked the link. Download, install, scan. The process took forever. Or maybe I just couldn't sit still. I paced. I stared out the window. I replayed a moment from 3 months ago, Dad standing in my doorway with a smile too tight for comfort, offering to optimize my system for freelance use. I'd shrugged and let him. I was exhausted from quitting my job, leaving Chicago, trying to explain to people that independence wasn't rebellion, it was survival. When the scan finished, I sat back down and nearly dropped the laptop. Remote access tool detected. Active for 78 days. Remote host admin.wht legacy. Calm. I didn't breathe. My vision tunneled. My father's old domain, the one he swore he let expire when he downsized operations. It wasn't malware. It was intent. I checked the Wi-Fi and slammed the toggle off. Then I yanked the Ethernet cable just in case. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The sound of my own breath grew loud in my ears. How long had they been watching? What else had they seen? I reached for a Post-it, the nearest thing that felt tangible, and scrawled 3 words in ink that bled. They're watching me. My phone buzzed again. Celeste, back up everything. Don't shut down. I'll be there in 10. What if they weren't just watching, but deciding I used to think I left home at 27? Turns out I took them with me in my hard drive. Celeste's home office was a maze of flickering monitors, coils of cables, and half-drunk cans of sparkling water. The rain had started while I was driving over gentle, at first, then insistent. Now it tapped against her skylight like a clock ticking down. I sat in the creaky swivel chair beside her desk laptop, open and exiled from Wi-Fi. Celeste's fingers flew over the keyboard, her expression unreadable. She was already deep in the code. Okay, she muttered. It's not just a remote access tool, it's a full surveillance suite. I stared at her. Meaning keylogging, screen mirroring. They could watch your screen in real time. Bank credentials, client files, everything. My breath caught. They had access to every freelance invoice, every tax form, every client email, and they didn't even try to hide it, she added grimly. There's a log file in here. Rulesetparent.log. I'm opening it now. I didn't move. I couldn't. I sat frozen hands curled tight in my lap while lines of text filled the terminal window like a confession typed in silence. Keywords, dozens of them. Savings, transfer, withdrawal, rent, tuition, lawyer. Celeste looked over at me. It's like they had a script running to flag anything they thought was a threat. I blinked fast, my throat tight. They always hated when I talked about moving out. Said renting was a waste, too expensive, too risky. Celeste turned the screen toward me. And here's the kicker. A shadow alert account. Any transaction over $500 triggered a notification to an admin address and whitmore.admin.org. I stared at it. My mouth had gone dry. That's my father's foundation domain. He told me it had lapsed. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The room began to shrink. The walls leaned in like judgment. I gripped the chair arms, trying to anchor myself, but a memory surged up and overran my defenses. Graduation day, age 22. I'd walked off the stage in cap and gown, breathless with the illusion of freedom. My parents waited with proud smiles and a silver box. A real tool for your real life, my father had said, handing over a gleaming MacBook Pro. Now you can start strong. I had thanked him, hugged him, and I'd never once wondered what he meant by real tool. I took the gift, booted it up, synced my accounts, and never looked back until now. It wasn't parenting, I whispered. This was puppeteering. Celeste didn't flinch. This is control, Nora. Calculated and remote. My head dropped into my hands. How much do they know? All of it, probably. And for a long time. She paused. The installation date matches the week you refused to go to the Whitmore Trust dinner. I lifted my head. That's when the withdrawals started. She nodded. I cross-referenced it. You said no to the family legacy, and suddenly your savings started bleeding. The Whitmore Trust. A legacy I was encouraged not to understand. All my life, it had been this golden word floating just out of reach, reserved for the obedient, the moldable. I never asked too many questions until I left. The guilt, the financial setbacks, the subtle punishments, I thought it was life being hard. I didn't realize it was calculated response. I stood abruptly, knocking over a stack of old tech manuals. Celeste jumped, then quickly righted them. Sorry, I muttered, heading toward my tote bag. My hands rummaged until I found it, a long-forgotten envelope slightly curled at the edges. It had been sitting in my drawer for 5 years. I hadn't dared to open it. Across the front, in my father's unmistakable pen, "For your future." I held it between my fingers like it was radioactive. What's that? Celeste asked. A promise. Or maybe a trap. I tore it open. The envelope didn't hold money. It held rules. A typed contract. Pages yellowed at the edges, but crisp in cruelty. I unfolded them slowly, laying each sheet across Celeste's kitchen island like relics from a ruined faith. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and ink, like it had been waiting in the shadows for this moment to breathe again. The first page read, Whitmore Family Private Trust Agreement, 2018. Below it, my full name, in bold, Nora Evelyn Whitmore, restricted beneficiary, restricted. The word clung to my throat like ash. Celeste leaned over, eyes scanning fast. This looks legit. Who prepared this? I turned to the final page. 2 signatures. One was my father's, formal and slanted. The other, delicate cursive in familiar blue ink, Evelyn Whitmore. Trustee. The same name etched into every childhood piano recital program and birthday card check. Clause 2.7 stopped me cold. Earnings above $50,000 annually shall result in matching deductions from trust share unless pre-approved by trustee. I stared at it, disbelief caving into something uglier. That's why every time I hit a new client tier, my bank balance dipped, I whispered. They were punishing me. Celeste's lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't oversight. This is economic surveillance. I shook my head slowly. I thought I'd built something of my own, but they were always inside the walls. Another clause detailed discretionary spending, how my lifestyle had to remain in alignment with core family values, or risk disciplinary withholding. What did that even mean? No online courses, no therapy sessions, no rent in neighborhoods they deemed unstable. Clause 5.1 buried another landmine. I couldn't transfer assets, including my own savings. Beyond a set threshold, without notifying the trustee, I felt like a prisoner paying rent to her own jailer. Celeste lifted a second sheet. You're not the sole beneficiary. Your brother's name is here too, Derek. Figures, I muttered. She frowned. But his restrictions are minimal. Just reporting requirements, no income caps, no approval clauses. They set you up differently. Of course they did. Derek was always the golden son, the one who didn't ask too many questions. Flashback bled into the room. I saw myself at 24 gripping a phone, ecstatic after receiving an offer in New York. A 6-figure package, full autonomy. I'd floated into the kitchen like I was finally worth something. My mother's face crumpled. It's too far, Nora. What about family dinners? What about Dad's blood pressure? We just want what's best for you. Here, she'd said, and I'd believed her. I'd let the fear of disappointing them override the pulse in my own chest. I came back to the present, clutching the paper harder than I realized. My knuckles had gone white. This isn't parenting, I said. This is puppeteering. Celeste nodded grimly. They built a paper cage, polished it, called it love. She rifled through her drawer and handed me a sleek, unbranded business card. Reed Marston, legal advocate, trust and conservatorship reform. She used to be in corporate. Celeste said, quit after a whistleblower case. She's relentless. I studied the name. My hand shook. I don't know if I'm ready. You were never given the luxury of readiness. My phone buzzed. A new notification from my bank low balance alert. Main checking. I hadn't even bought lunch. Celeste tapped the contract again. There's more. Clause 6.4. In the event of formal dispute, all family-held assets and disbursements shall be frozen pending arbitration. I blinked. Meaning? If you fight this legally, they can cut you off completely before any court even hears you. Suddenly, everything felt tight. The air, the room, the life I'd been living under illusion. There was no such thing as cutting the cord if the cord was wrapped around your throat from the inside. They've planned for rebellion. I used to think I skipped those family dinners out of spite, but now I realize I wasn't invited to control the narrative. I was excluded to forget the script. The elevator chimed with a soft, hollow tone as I reached the 10th floor of Reed Marston's office building. Everything felt colder today, like the weather had synced with my mood. The receptionist offered a polite nod, but I barely noticed. My hands clutched the envelope of trust documents tighter than necessary. I wasn't here to ask anymore. I was here to understand. Reed's office was sleek but unpretentious. A muted rug, tall bookshelves, and 2 chairs angled toward each other, as if always waiting for conflict to take its seat. He gestured for me to sit and took the envelope, flipping through the pages with a precision that made me hold my breath. Clause stacking, he muttered, tapping the corner of a page. They've layered so many conditional riders, it's practically a trap disguised as benevolence. This kind of structure obsolete, but effective. I didn't know what was worse, the calm in his voice, or the fact that it matched the calm my mother used when she said, "It's all taken care of, dear." He slid over a file. 3 separate Whitmore Trust amendments filed during family dinners over the past 5 years. All major. All list you as present and consenting. My blood ran cold. I was never there. He nodded, slowly. That's the point. A memory pushed forward like an uninvited guest. Autumn 2021. I just launched my freelance accounting practice. I remember waiting for the annual invitation. Whitmore Trust dinners were a predictable tradition. But that year, nothing. Just a voicemail from Evelyn. Don't worry about this year. We'll represent your interests. Focus on your business. I should have asked more questions. Reed looked up. Did you ever submit a digital signature for any estate document years ago? I said quietly. When I first joined the family's corporate arm? Dad insisted on having everything on file for convenience. He leaned back. Then I have reason to believe those signatures were recycled, maybe even manipulated. Metadata from the digital approval logs might give us timestamps. IP addresses, Celeste could trace them. As if summoned, Celeste messaged, "Found the signature hash." The IP is familiar check old apartment Wi-Fi logs, also pinged from a backup server. I turned the screen toward Reed. He exhaled. This is enough to raise serious flags. If they submitted documents with your old signature without reauthorization, and worse, used your previous IP address, it crosses into criminal territory. Forgery. Fraud. I swallowed hard. You think they forged my compliance? No, he said. I think they rewrote it in advance. The word amendment had never sounded so surgical, so deliberate. Reed walked me through the most recent change from 2022, a clause revoking my emergency override rights to access the trust in times of personal crisis, a right every other family member still held. The digital audit trail pointed straight to my former Evanston Apartments IP. That dinner, I said slowly, was the one in November. Mom called it a small gathering. Reed nodded grimly. And that's when the clause was executed. A cold numbness spread from my spine to my fingertips. I'd believed I was avoiding them to preserve my dignity. I didn't realize they'd weaponized my absence into a signature of consent. I need you to build a case, I said. Not just against the clause, against the entire structure. Reed hesitated. That won't be easy. Your family's name means nothing. I interrupted. Not anymore. I walked toward the window. From here, I could see a sliver of the lake, a glimmer of blue between buildings. It reminded me of those childhood summers when I believed there was nothing I couldn't swim away from. Not this time. Then it's time to go to dinner. You don't pick a war with your parents. You test the water first with a ripple that looks like coincidence. Just enough to see who flinches. The co-working space smelled like coffee and ambition. Glass walls, quiet cubicles, and enough anonymity to make me feel invisible again. I rented it under a pseudonym, Whitner & Co., named after a stray thought in a dream and an old email I hadn't touched since college. It was early October, crisp and dry, the kind of weather that usually made me feel like walking for hours. But today, I wasn't moving. I was watching. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking beside the $100 transfer. Not too large, not too small, just enough to rattle the right ghost. I sent it from an EIN linked to a dormant LLC. Celeste helped me resurrect filed under an address in Des Moines. I didn't touch my home. Wi-Fi didn't use my personal laptop. Everything was clean. Then I waited. Celeste sat across from me, biting into a chocolate croissant like it was just another Tuesday. You sure you want to bait them this soon? I'm not baiting, I said, voice low. I'm nudging. She raised her eyebrows. Same thing if they have claws. The transaction cleared, the account balance refreshed. No alerts, no flags, just quiet until the next morning. My phone lit up at 7:04 a.m. Evelyn. I stared at the name for 3 rings before picking up. Everything okay with your rent this month, honey? Her tone was all sunshine and citrus tea. I had a dream you were moving again. Isn't that strange? My throat tightened. It's fine. Why? Oh, just wondering. You always were adventurous with leases. I hung up 10 seconds later, using a polite excuse about an early Zoom meeting. Celeste watched me from across the kitchen island. Let me see the logs, she said, already walking toward my laptop. We combed through every log on the burner device, the masked IP, the VPN tunneling protocol we'd layered 3 times deep. Clean. Completely clean. They didn't break in, Celeste muttered. They didn't have to. Someone's already inside. My stomach dropped. The bank. She nodded. Or someone who has access to your account alerts. It clicked. I ran a reverse trace on the number Evelyn called from. The trail led to a proxy landline buried in a corporate block, Whitmore Holdings HR. That's not even subtle, I whispered. Or it's bait, Celeste replied. They're showing their hand because they think you won't dare call it out. I looked out the window. Across the street, a man was sweeping leaves off the sidewalk. The world felt intact, functional. But under the surface, it was rigged. A flash of memory hit me. Last Thanksgiving, Vanessa Cole, my brother Derek's girlfriend, had sat beside me at the long dining table. She wasn't rude, just too curious. "You like being freelance?" she'd asked voice light. "Doesn't it feel risky without a corporate net?" I'd brushed it off as small talk then. Now I wasn't so sure. "Vanessa works in HR," I said slowly. "Intern at Whitmore Holdings." Celeste looked up. "That your brother's girlfriend?" I nodded. "She's never asked about family stuff. Just money, structure, benefits." We didn't have to say it aloud. "A mole." Celeste leaned over her screen, fingers dancing across the keys. "Time to feed them fiction." We fabricated a new digital deposit, $6,700 from a made-up environmental grant program, seated in the same hidden account. The metadata looked legitimate. The confirmation emails bounced from a burner inbox to a cloud vault with no name. It was the most elegant lie I'd ever told. Then we waited. 12 hours later, Celeste's alert chimed. The transaction wasn't touched, she said, brows furrowed. But it was mirrored, accessed, copied, logged under a monitoring proxy. They're still watching. I stood from my chair, heart steady for the first time in weeks. I wasn't the girl with trembling fingers anymore. I wasn't writing post-its in fear. I was drawing the first map of a battlefield I intended to burn. Celeste turned to me. "Are you ready to burn the script? You have 10 business days to respond. After that, we assume the trust terms remain uncontested." That sentence didn't scare me. It insulted me. The envelope was thick, official, cream-colored, watermarked with the faint WHT insignia behind every page. It had waited for me on the front desk of the co-working space that morning, placed neatly on top of my mail stack, as if it were just another subscription flyer or invoice. But I knew the scent of pressure when I opened it: unperfumed paper, expensive ink, and a threat disguised as protocol. Reed was already sitting across from me, latte untouched. He took one look at the first page and let out a low whistle. "They're offering you a chance to shut up quietly. That's what this is." I handed over the rest. Legalese meet translator. He skimmed it with the same care he once used reviewing million-dollar acquisitions back when we both worked in the firm downtown. His expression didn't change until page 3, where his mouth tightened slightly. "Here. Failure to provide a timely dispute will be interpreted as assent to revisions dated June 2021, August 2022, and May 2023. They're locking you in by silence." "I thought silence was neutral," I said. "In contracts, silence is consent," he corrected, "especially if they can prove you received notice." A cold weight pressed into my chest. I looked out the tall windows of the co-working lounge where the street below was moving along in complete ignorance. A bicyclist in a yellow hoodie dodged a rideshare van. Someone laughed into their phone by the bagel stand. Their days weren't being decided by papers they hadn't signed. "They expect me to be intimidated," I said. "Instead, I'm furious." Reed nodded. "Good. But don't just get angry. Get strategic." Celeste joined us 10 minutes later, laptop already open. "If they're sending paper, they're covering their trail. We need to create one of our own." Reed passed her the documents. "We want to respond, but not honestly. Can we embed something in the reply?" Celeste smiled faintly. "Pixel tracking? Sure. I'll host it on a quiet domain. The minute they open the email version, I'll get the timestamp and IP." The plan felt small compared to the looming structure they'd built around me, but it was a move, one I was choosing not reacting to. Later that night, alone in the rented office, I scanned every word of the trust again. My name sat in black ink on line after line, as if it belonged more to them than to me. "Nora A. Whitmore hereby acknowledges." The beneficiary agrees. The trustee may revoke. There was nothing I had agreed to not knowingly, yet the language was careful, retroactive, and relentless. A photo frame sat on my desk. I hadn't brought it intentionally. It was tucked into the folder Celeste had grabbed from my old storage unit. A family photo, Thanksgiving, maybe 2015. Everyone in their finest. Walter's hand rested firm on Derek's shoulder. Evelyn's pearls glistened. My brother's girlfriend, Vanessa, hovered at the edge, half-smile poised. I stood near the middle stiff-backed hands clasped. I wasn't smiling. Even then, I must have known. I closed the letter and slid the reply draft into a manila folder. Celeste would email it from a controlled account the next morning. "You're doing it," Reed had said earlier. "You're poking the bear, and you haven't even picked up a stick yet." "I'm not poking," I replied. "I'm counting its teeth." We sent the pixel-embedded reply the next morning at 9:06 a.m. By 11:52, Celeste had her answer. It pinged, she said, stepping into my workspace like a storm in sneakers. Twice. My heart climbed into my throat. Where one IP from North Michigan Avenue. Local. That's their legal team. I nodded, bracing myself. The second one's harder. She continued. It was routed through a VPN in Switzerland. Geneva. My breath hitched. Geneva wasn't random. That server's registered to a commercial trust services company, she added. They handle international fund laundering and blind asset holding. I stared at her. So they're not just reacting to me. No, Reed said from behind. They're not just playing defense. They've already started laundering something. I didn't expect the room to be dark wood and leather chairs. I expected cold marble. But it wasn't the room that judged me. It was my father's expression when he realized I wasn't bluffing. The chairs creaked softly as we sat. I felt every centimeter of pressure in my spine, my knees hovering at attention. Reed was calm beside me, flipping open his leather folio. Across the table sat my parents, their posture a silent performance of innocence. Evelyn's eyes held a delicate shine like a politician before a speech. Walter didn't blink, just scanned the room as if it bored him. Arbitrator Diana Keyes tapped her pen lightly against the oak tabletop. "Ms. Whitmore, Mr. Marston. Let's proceed." I inhaled slowly and nodded, even as my heart pounded like a courtroom drum. I had rehearsed this moment, braced for it, but the weight of it still pressed into my chest. I looked straight ahead as Reed began. The evidence submitted demonstrates a pattern of unauthorized digital surveillance, he said. My client's personal and financial data were accessed without consent. Furthermore, we've identified forged documentation attached to recent trust amendments. He pushed forward a folder. Keyes flipped it open and studied the network logs, time-stamped screenshots, the flagged IP addresses. These entries suggest continuous access over a span of 10 weeks, she said. You're alleging this was done without Ms. Whitmore's knowledge. Reed's tone sharpened. Not alleging, proving. Across the table, the Whitmore counsel, a tall man with 2 white teeth named Gregory Renshaw, offered a disarming smile. Your Honor, surely this is a family misunderstanding. The devices were once shared and the trust is a legacy structure. A few technical overlaps are hardly evidence of malice. Keyes glanced at me. Ms. Whitmore, do you wish to respond directly? I met Renshaw's gaze, then my parents'. They didn't just look at my bank account. They mirrored every tab I opened, every freelance contract, every client wire, every invoice I sent. They watched it all. Not for protection, for power. I saw Walter's jaw tense, a crack in the sculpture. Evelyn broke in her voice, falsely sweet. Nora, this is a distortion. We've only ever wanted you to be safe to be small, I cut in. You wanted me contained, dependent. Every time I moved forward, you tightened the leash. Reed handed over the second document. A trust amendment from October 2022. The metadata showed it was signed from my old home IP while I was under general anesthesia for an outpatient procedure. We verified her hospital admission and network downtime during the signing window, Reed said. There is no legal way Ms. Whitmore could have executed this document. Renshaw's smile faded. Keyes raised a brow. Mr. Renshaw, he cleared his throat. We'll need to verify the metadata independently. In the meantime, we request a recess. Granted. 15 minutes, Keyes said, closing the folder with finality. I rose my legs a little unsteady, but I forced a steady breath. I didn't look at my parents until we were in the hallway. The old family portrait flashed in my mind, me at 17, stiff in a blazer I hated, standing beside them like a misfiled document in their perfect cabinet. Walter approached, his voice low but stern. You don't understand what this family owes to itself. The trust wasn't just for you. It's a structure, a legacy. I stared at the man I once tried to please with honor roll certificates and polite silence. No, I said, voice quiet but unshaking. I finally do. There's a moment when you stop asking, why did they do this to me, and start asking, how long were they planning it? Celeste's apartment no longer resembled a home. It had turned into a tactical command center, whiteboards full of branching diagrams, boxes of color-coded files, and a dozen digital tabs blinking on her monitors. The scent of burnt toast lingered, though no one had eaten. We weren't hungry anymore, just wide awake. The hearing had cracked the surface. Now we were digging into the rot beneath it. Reed unrolled a blueprint-like chart of the Whitmore Trust structure and tapped a red-circled node. Now that arbitration validated your claims, we can compel them to disclose full trust operational records under court oversight. I stared at the name in the circle. Evelyn Whitmore, still the acting trustee. Celeste brought up a timeline she had reconstructed. These are the beneficiaries removed since the trust's inception. Some were cut after disputes, some after health concerns, others just faded from the records. But here's the thing. None of them contested. One name blinked brighter than the others. Lydia Quinn. My aunt. She was removed in 2003, Celeste confirmed. No formal statement, just a settlement and silence. My chest tightened. I had vague memories of Lydia, a quiet woman who once gave me a leather-bound notebook and told me to write my own ledgers. Then she disappeared. Reed handed me a printed contact list. We found a number. Your call. I hesitated only a moment before dialing. 4 rings. Then, you're late, Nora. My breath caught. You were expecting me? I was expecting someone. Eventually, Lydia said. Her voice was older than I remembered, but clear like winter air. Why did you leave? I didn't, she said plainly. I was erased. Your mother was thorough. Why she learned the trust's language early. Not law. Leverage. She didn't marry for love, Nora. She married for entry, and once inside, she rewrote the bylaws one smile at a time. Lydia's words were slow, deliberate, carved out of memory and scar tissue. I asked too many questions about fund flow. Next thing I knew, I was labeled mentally unfit, voted off the board, my accounts frozen, my choices vanished. Celeste muted her laptop and leaned closer. Ask her for documentation. I still have something Lydia said before I could ask. 1 letter. Your grandfather's. 5 minutes later, Celeste opened the scanned document. It was old, the paper-yellowed ink faded and wavering. But the signature was unmistakably Grandpa Edwards, dated January 1997. At the bottom, one sentence burned through autonomy without scrutiny is a threat they'll never allow. I read it aloud. Reed exhaled sharply. That's doctrine, not advice. No, I said. That's prophecy. It all snapped together like a chain pulled taut. Evelyn's convenient interventions, my father's careful grooming, the gifts that were traps. They weren't trying to support me. They were trying to calibrate me. Celeste pulled up another window. I searched internal staffing logs. Look at this. Vanessa Cole wasn't just HR, she's listed under compliance auditing. My stomach dropped. That's Derek's girlfriend. She had the authority to flag and mirror high-value transactions. If she pinged your neobank account, we'll catch it in subpoenaed audit logs, Reed added. And if that happens, we can build a direct link between trust oversight and illegal surveillance. I turned away and stared out the window. The sun had dipped behind the skyline. From here, the city lights looked like constellations, but in this galaxy, every star was tracking you. They're going to escalate, I said quietly. No more shadows. They'll come after me personally. Celeste nodded. They think they still own the narrative. I picked up a pen and opened my notebook, flipping past scribbles and timelines until I found a blank page. In the corner, I wrote, "This ends with me." Then I stared at it. My heart didn't race. My fingers didn't tremble. I felt ready. Reed looked at the time. Once we send the discovery motion, the trust will have 30 days to respond. They'll stall, Celeste said. They'll try, he agreed. But we've got leverage now, and eyes watching them for a change. Lydia texted one final message before going silent again. Be careful. They rewrite history faster than truth can catch up. I tapped it once on my screen, letting the words burn into my thoughts. This wasn't just family drama. This was systemic, engineered, legacy by design. And for the first time, I wasn't asking why. I was asking how much farther it went. I'm not the first, but I'll be the last. They thought I'd back down. Instead, I filed a motion, not for money, but for reckoning. Reed's office smelled like legal pads and rain. The clouds were stacking up outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and inside the war room had shifted from tense to surgical. I hovered near his desk as he pressed send on the motion, a request for full forensic audit of the Whitmore Trust dating back 15 years. Congratulations, he said dryly. You just launched a missile. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like overdue arithmetic. For years, they'd drafted my life in legalese, so I was responding in kind. I hadn't asked for this war, but I wasn't about to let them define the battlefield. The media came next. The first email was from a niche legal commentary blog. Then came 2 podcasters, 1 mid-tier investigative journalist, and finally a cautious producer from the Syndicate Table, a growing podcast focused on ethics and wealth. I agreed to 1 interview pre-recorded, tightly scripted, no room for improvisation. Reed reviewed my talking points line by line, slicing adjectives like a surgeon. No emotion, just precision. Facts are your weapon now. The recording studio was quieter than I expected. Felt more like a therapist's office than a media hub. The host leaned in with soft concern. Why now, he asked. I didn't flinch, because silence is how legacy crimes thrive. He blinked. You mean financial? I paused, then said carefully, control disguised as protection. Privacy sacrificed for obedience. Wealth turned into shackles. That's what I'm fighting? The episode dropped 3 days later. And then it started. Evelyn's statement arrived not through lawyers, but through the press. Our daughter is unwell, it read. We've supported her through many personal struggles. It saddens us that she's chosen this path. All we've ever done is love and protect her. Love, protect. Words that tasted like chloroform. Celeste nearly shattered her coffee mug when she read it aloud. They're painting you unstable. I know, I whispered. It's exactly what they did to Aunt Lydia. And Grandpa Edward before his stroke. The clip of my podcast interview started to gain traction, shared mostly by digital rights advocates, but also whistleblowers and legal reform groups. Reed met me with a grim smile. This isn't just legal now, it's narrative. They'll try to discredit yours before it can root. That's when I got the text. From Derek. This is bigger than you think. Stop. No greeting, no signature, just that. I stared at the message for a full minute before I locked my phone. He hadn't returned my calls in months. And now, this Celeste frowned when I showed her. You think he's trying to protect you? I shook my head. I think he's knee-deep in it. Then came Vanessa. A formal complaint landed in Reed's inbox, allegations of hostile digital behavior from me. Vanessa claimed I had accessed files outside my clearance during a shared holiday visit last year. She suggested it was part of a pattern of digital aggression. Reed's eyes narrowed. She's laying groundwork to discredit any testimony you present that involves her. She was part of the surveillance net, I said. She saw too much, but proving it requires access we don't have yet. By the end of that week, we had more than allegations. We had retaliation. Reed opened the email in silence. When he spoke, his voice was flat. The trust board has frozen your asset access. They cited concern for fiduciary stability and preservation of trust reputation pending resolution. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. They just cut me off. They think if they squeeze, you'll fold. I didn't answer. I turned slowly to Celeste, who had been unusually quiet. She looked up at me with steady resolve. Then, let's take the fight to the trust itself. There's always a final failsafe in systems like these. But what if the loop never ends because no one ever broke it? The storm outside hadn't begun yet, but it was thinking about it. I could hear the occasional gust brush against the windows of Reed's office, like fingers trailing along the glass waiting to strike. Inside the room was too quiet, too reverent, like a church before a confession. I sat with my elbows on the edge of the leather conference table, staring at the package Lydia had sent. It was older than I'd expected. A square steel safe cold to the touch with a faded shipping label from Oregon and Lydia's sharp handwriting, "For Nora, when she's ready." I wasn't ready, but the timeline didn't care. Reed entered carrying a thick stack of printouts. "Clause 14B," he said without greeting. I found it. He dropped the papers in front of me. The header read Appendix C, Final Contingency Clauses. In the event a direct heir is declared legally estranged, he read aloud, "The trust shall default to majority decision among remaining shareholders for all resource reallocation decisions, including but not limited to asset access, financial disbursement, and emergency override." Meaning, I murmured, if I'm pushed far enough out, they can vote to erase me, like I was never there. He nodded, and they have more than enough votes. A loop, a self-healing wound. The system was never meant to break. It was meant to regenerate. I reached toward the safe. My hand hesitated over the dial. Reed watched me closely, but said nothing. The click of the latch unlocking felt too loud. Inside, nestled in old newspaper clippings and what looked like a wax-sealed envelope, was a camcorder tape, labeled in Sharpie E. Whitmore, October 1999. Celeste arrived just as we dusted off Reed's old player and fed the tape into the monitor. Static then, an old man's voice, frail but clear. Grandpa Edward appeared on the screen in a study lined with books. He looked into the camera like he was looking at me. If this tape is playing, he began someone's asked questions I wasn't allowed to answer. Reed leaned forward, tension rising. Edward continued, "Legacy is a beautiful word until it becomes a leash. I tried to embed protections, but the system, our system doesn't reward freedom. It punishes it." His voice trembled, then steadied. "They'll tell you it's for your good. They'll tell you we all agreed. But look closely. The consent is often inherited, not given." Then static again. The screen went black. Silence held the room hostage. It was Lydia who'd preserved this, who'd chosen not to burn it, though she easily could have. I exhaled. He knew. Even then. Reed broke the quiet. Clause 14B references a statute repealed in 2017. Legally speaking, it's invalid if we can prove your rights were altered post-repeal. The light flicked back on inside me. So it's not just a crack. It's a door. Celeste turned her laptop toward us. "We've got more than a door. I just launched a microsite, Trust Abuse, How Legacy Can Become a Weapon. You're the lead case study." I stared at the screen. My name, my story. Public now. Reed passed me the petition draft. "This isn't a motion to defend. It's a petition to dismantle the clause entirely. If the court agrees, they have to renegotiate with you from zero." It felt different. Not like survival. Like offense. I signed. For the first time in weeks, I walked out of Reed's office, feeling something close to peace. Rain fell gently. The sky was dark but no longer ominous. I took the long way home, let the air soak into my coat, let the silence stretch, until I turned the key to my apartment and saw the box. No return address, just my name. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was my birth certificate, and the amendment line, "Name correction filed, October 2018, the year they sealed the trust revisions." Walter had delivered it, or ordered it delivered. I didn't need to check the hallway. His fingerprints were already all over it. They weren't just rewriting inheritance. They were rewriting me. They thought I'd be ashamed in front of the board, but shame doesn't live in truth. And I brought receipts. The air inside the Whitmore Holdings boardroom was colder than it should have been for November. The marble floors echoed each heel strike like a gavel. I tried not to notice the portraits on the walls, generations of Whitmore men staring down at me, their judgment carved into brushstroke. They didn't intimidate me. Not anymore. Reed stood beside me, calm as always, briefcase open, the red tabbed binder already laid flat. Across the table, Walter sat upright, shoulders stiff as granite. Evelyn, coiffed and composed, kept her gaze narrowed, part pity, part poison. Vanessa Cole sat near the end, tapping something into a phone with rehearsed disinterest. Derek was nowhere in sight. No surprise there. Arbitrator Diana Keyes gave no preamble. Ms. Whitmore. Mr. Marston, you may proceed. Reed clicked the remote. We moved to invalidate Clause 14B of the Whitmore Trust, citing its dependence on a repealed Illinois Statute 2017 revision. We will show not only its legal invalidity, but the systematic abuse it enabled. A pause. Exhibit A, Appendix G of the original trust. On the screen appeared the clause, if any direct heir is deemed legally estranged, the trust defaults to a vote of the silent majority. And beneath it, the statute citation, bold, outdated, repealed. I let the silence stretch. Let them read it 3 times. Evelyn's lips curled into a faint, dismissive smile. Walter didn't blink. Exhibit B, Reed continued. A video statement by Edward Whitmore, founder of the trust, dated October 1999, submitted as testamentary reflection. Evelyn scoffed aloud. He was senile by then. That video isn't a will. Keyes held up a hand. It won't be treated as such, but I will hear it. The screen darkened, then lit up with grainy tape lines. Grandpa Edward appeared thinner than I remembered, sitting in that old oak chair he refused to replace. His voice was softer than I expected. If legacy requires obedience, he said, then what you're preserving is silence, not strength. My throat burned. Walter leaned forward, jaw tight. This isn't admissible testimony. He wasn't in sound mind. No one asked for your diagnosis, Reed interrupted coolly. Keyes raised an eyebrow. This video supports context. Let's move to evidence of harm. My hands didn't shake when I stepped forward. I opened the folder with the bank logs. These are transaction authorizations initiated using credentials tied to my identity. I was in recovery from surgery when one was signed. Vanessa shifted. Evelyn leaned in. You're misunderstanding the coordination efforts. We helped with your finances. No, I said. You didn't coordinate. You infiltrated. You used my digital signature, my IP, my device fingerprint. Without consent. Reed turned the page. Here's the server ping log from Geneva, the same domain used to mirror her accounts. The digital trail leads directly back to Whitmore Holdings' internal relay. Evelyn's smile faltered. This is an ambush. Funny, I said that's what it felt like when I realized my entire career was designed to loop back into your control. Ms. Whitmore. Keyes nodded toward the table. Do you have a witness? Reed didn't answer. The doors behind us opened. Derek entered, a half-second delay in his step. His tie was askew, his hair still wet from rain. Walter's head whipped toward him. Keyes motioned for silence. Mr. Whitmore, are you aware of the document revisions in question? Derek glanced at me, then back at the table. Yes, he said. The amendment in 2020, the one Nora supposedly signed, I was there. She was unconscious in the hospital. She didn't sign it. The boardroom dropped into silence so deep I could hear my pulse. Walter's knuckles whitened. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't? Derek's voice cracked. You said it was for her own good. But you didn't ask her? You just decided. Keyes cleared her throat. This statement, corroborated by digital evidence, supports provisional invalidation. Reed nodded. Then we request immediate suspension of Clause 14B pending full audit. Keyes made a note. So ordered. I exhaled. For a second, I almost let relief in. Then Evelyn turned to me, stepping close enough that I could smell her perfume, sharp lilac and paper. Her whisper slithered past her smile. You think this is justice? We haven't even begun. I met her eyes. My voice didn't rise. Good. Neither have I. The difference between collapse and confession, one destroys you. The other destroys everything else. I sat across from Derek in Reed's office, my arms folded tight to keep from shaking. The blinds were half-drawn shadows slicing across his face like judgment. He wasn't crying, but his voice shook as if some invisible thread had finally snapped. She said, if I kept quiet, she'd pay off my loans. $38,000. Gone with one phone call. He didn't say Evelyn's name, but we both heard it. Reed leaned forward. Did she ever ask you to sign anything? No, that's the worst part, Derek said. I never signed. But the trust reflects my vote in abstention. Legally, that's compliance. Of course it did. Their genius wasn't in brute force. It was in building systems that punished resistance by automating silence. Derek reached into his coat and pulled out a slim black folder. I wasn't supposed to see this. It was buried in the Foundation's cloud storage under philanthropy initiatives. But it doesn't add up. The ledger inside listed dates, disbursements, and causes clean water projects, school grants, housing subsidies. But the recipient accounts were mostly offshore Cayman, Belize, Mauritius. No donor IDs, no audit trails. A paper-thin fiction with glossy words and rotting spine. Celeste tapped her pen against the table. This is money laundering, disguised as family virtue. The room fell silent. Derek avoided my eyes. I thought I was protecting the family. I didn't realize I was just keeping the trapdoor shut. I didn't know whether to thank him or hate him. Later that night, Celeste and I broke into the archive. Not with crowbars or alarms, just a key card Reed had kept from his corporate days. The old Whitmore Holdings storage wing smelled like damp paper and dust-slick regret. Boxes stood in quiet rows, yellowing at the corners. The past sealed in banker's tape. We found the file labeled Family Engagements, Financial Coordination, 2016-2022. A brittle binder, half-shredded with notes in Evelyn's handwriting. Each retreat charity event or family milestone was annotated with a transaction wire, transfers, charitable endowments, guest reimbursements. It wasn't accounting. It was orchestration. My fingers traced a line. Aspen, 19, VC, 14K approval. CVC ledger, Vanessa Cole. Not just Derek's girlfriend. Not just an intern. A name in ink listed beside six-figure authorizations. Either she was an obedient pawn or a willing insider. Celeste pulled up her phone and began cross-referencing employee records. She was promoted 3 times in 18 months. No one does that in compliance unless they're useful. Useful or loyal. Reed's voice came through the speaker I dialed in. That Belize account you flagged. It's tied to a Shell Foundation, BUHT recovery initiatives. Guess what else is in the name registry I already knew? Walter Whitmore, number Vanessa Cole, as secretary. The paper in my hand blurred as rage crept up my neck. They'd built an empire of mirrors, every angle reflecting virtue while hiding rot. My trust, my name, my inheritance, it had all been leveraged into a front. This isn't just financial abuse, I said. It's organized fraud. Reed's voice was grim. We send this to the feds. Tonight. If they bury it, we go public. I hesitated. Not because I had doubts, but because I knew what came next. They'd call it betrayal. They'd drag my name through courtrooms and headlines. But I couldn't live in their architecture anymore. Send it, I said. Send everything. We returned to my apartment in silence. The kind of silence that feels earned, not empty. I left my bag on the kitchen counter and moved toward my desk, eager to back up the scans and ledgers again, my habit now twice a day. But something was off. My front door hadn't latched. I froze. Celeste saw it at the same time. She pushed me behind her and stepped in first, phone flashlight on. Drawers were open. My laptop was gone. The safe Reed had given me for documents was empty. My printer tray had been pulled out and flipped. Even the framed photo of me and Grandpa Edward was face down, like someone didn't just steal, but desecrated. Every file, every drive, gone. I turned to slow circle, my stomach collapsing inward. They knew, I whispered. Celeste crouched near the doorway. No signs of forced entry. They didn't break in. They had a key. They came for the evidence. But what they didn't know, they already left their fingerprints on everything. The lock was broken cleanly, almost surgically. Whoever entered my apartment had known exactly where to go. My desk drawer was half open, its contents disrupted. The cabinet under my kitchen counter, the one where I kept printed copies labeled drives, backups, they were gone. Not all of it. Just the pieces I hadn't shared yet. I stared at the space for a long time, then dialed Reed with hands that didn't tremble anymore. They took the physicals, I said. I figured they might, he replied calmly. That's why I made triplicates. He sent me a link, an encrypted vault containing every scan, every ledger, every damning timestamp Celeste had pulled in the last 3 weeks. And just like that, fear stopped having power. I forwarded the vault to the DOJ contact Reed had prepped weeks ago. No drama, no hesitation. Just one line in the subject, supplemental to pending case file. By morning, headlines were everywhere. Whitmore Holdings under federal inquiry. Trust abuse allegations mount. Daughter speaks. It wasn't protection. It was control. Celeste's voice narrated part of it in a clipped podcast she'd recorded overnight. This isn't a story about inheritance. It's a story about conditioning, about what happens when loyalty is weaponized. The episode hit 50,000 downloads in 24 hours. I didn't flinch when I heard my name. Not anymore. Walter responded first, true to form. A high-gloss press release from a new firm read, Mr. Whitmore remains committed to full transparency and has stepped back voluntarily from executive duties pending resolution. Translation, damage control. Evelyn said nothing, but Vanessa did. She appeared on a morning segment dressed in gray and regret. I was following Evelyn's instruction. I didn't know the full extent. She didn't cry, but her voice cracked at the right moments. Reed laughed when he saw it. They're peeling off. The first rat's off the ship. Later that day, Derek called. I'm going public, he said. They've made me complicit long enough. He appeared on WCLN's Evening News and said plain and soft, I resigned from Whitmore Holdings, and I no longer recognize the family trust as legitimate. The anchor leaned in sensing drama. Derek didn't indulge it. He just looked into the camera and added, My sister told the truth. We all knew. We just didn't act. That broke something. By the next morning, Aunt Lydia filed an affidavit. I read it twice, hand trembling this time. I was silenced 20 years ago through the same mechanisms. I've carried shame for not warning the next generation. Not again. Reed forwarded the court notification without commentary. Evelyn had been removed from the trust's board by a unanimous internal vote. Walter had been formally suspended. The system was cannibalizing itself now, trying to protect what remained. I stepped outside to breathe. The air was sharp with oncoming frost. The last leaves clung to bare branches like they didn't want to witness the end. And maybe they didn't. But I would. I had to. That afternoon, a courier came to Reed's office. The envelope was heavy wax-sealed, cream-colored. Inside, a formal document and a handwritten note from the Whitmore family lawyer. Settlement proposal enclosed. I wrote the letter 100 times in my head. To my mother, my father, my old self. But none of them were the real recipient. The lake was still today. Not glass, not storm. Just still like it was listening. The wind carried the last scents of fall wood smoke and old leaves. I sat on the back porch of the Whitmore estate with a cup of black coffee and a tin box older than I was. The air bit at my knuckles, but I didn't go inside. The quiet suited me now. I didn't need walls to feel protected. I needed the sky, the earth, and this page. The porch creaked with memory. This was where Derek once fell asleep during a 4th of July speech, where Evelyn insisted on posed family photos, where Grandpa Edward sat with a blanket on his knees, eyes always fixed on the horizon like he was waiting for someone braver than him to arrive. I opened my journal, flipped past pages of court dates, IP logs, transcripts, and grief. Then a blank one. No heading. Just space. Dear Grandpa, I began. I didn't fight for the trust. I fought for the truth you buried inside it. The pen didn't tremble. My fingers didn't hesitate. Words flowed, not like a confession, but like a verdict, long overdue. I wrote about the amendments made in silence, the money funneled offshore, the generations taught to obey before they could speak. I wrote about Vanessa, about Derek, about the mother who raised me like a fragile investment. And I wrote about the girl I used to be compliant, grateful, brilliant in ways that never upset the system. I didn't apologize to her. I didn't owe her that. I told her what she needed to know, that freedom is expensive, but silence is bankrupt. A wind picked up scattering oak leaves across the porch. I remembered a colder November years ago, when Grandpa sat me on his lap with a ledger in hand and said, "Justice is like math. If it doesn't add up, keep asking." He never told me that sometimes the equation is rigged. When the letter was finished, I didn't sign my name. I wrote instead, not an heir, a witness. It didn't feel like defiance. It felt like truth finally uncaged. I folded the paper into thirds, crisp, neat, like the contract Evelyn once handed me, only this one belonged to me. I placed it inside the old tin box beside an expired trust beneficiary card and a faded photo of the family before it fractured. The oak tree near the shoreline still stood tall. It had watched generations picnic, argue, reconcile, and lie beneath its branches. Today, it would witness something else. I walked across the lawn heels, sinking into soft dirt, found the notch in the roots where the soil was loose. I dug with both hands, no shovel, no ceremony, just skin and truth. When the hole was deep enough, I placed the tin box inside and pressed the earth back over it. No headstone, no marker, just the weight of memory and the silence that followed. Back on the porch, my phone buzzed once. Celeste. They called. "Settlement's in, but you don't have to reply." I stared at the message, then at the lake. The answer was already written. "I already did," I whispered. There was no final roar, no gavel slam, no orchestra to tell me I had won. But there was breath in my lungs, calm in my spine, and a quiet I hadn't earned but reclaimed. Inside the house felt unfamiliar now. Furniture looked smaller, hallways shorter. The portraits didn't glare the way they used to. I didn't linger. I picked up my keys from the hallway table. My phone stayed in my pocket, not silenced by fear, just not needing to speak. The front door clicked shut behind me as I stepped out into the open. I wasn't fleeing. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing. They once erased me with silence. I answered with a signature. The podcast began, not with music, but breath, a soft inhale, a pause, then my voice. My name is Nora Whitmore. This isn't about revenge. This isn't even about justice. It's about air, about being allowed to breathe outside the lines someone else drew for you. The episode was called Inheritance. Celeste had asked if I wanted a sound bed underneath something cinematic. I said no. I wanted silence. That, too, was an inheritance. I sat alone in my apartment, hands wrapped around a warm mug, listening as the words unspooled from speakers I no longer kept hidden behind books. The narration played like a memory I could finally own. No more distortions. No more committee-approved versions of me. Outside Evanston yawned into winter. The sidewalks sparkled with traces of last night's frost, and the lake breathed mist into the early morning light. I pulled on a coat, tucked my scarf in high, and walked. 2 neighbors looked up from raking. They didn't say anything, but one of them gave a small nod. I returned it. The other seemed unsure, her rake, pausing mid-sweep. I didn't hold it against her. I knew the feeling, trying to process someone whose story broke your tidy boxes. The community center was warm when I entered. Children's drawings covered the bulletin board. Someone had made cocoa. The air smelled of nutmeg and old books. I wasn't scheduled for anything today, but it didn't matter. I came here now because I wanted to, not to prove worth, not to balance scales, but to offer space. A small girl sat near the reading nook, feet swinging over the edge of her chair. She looked up as I passed. "Are you famous?" I crouched beside her. "No, just free." She seemed to consider that like it was a kind of magic. Maybe it was. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Celeste. Her message read, "You ready for part 2?" I smiled. I knew what she meant. The fight was over, at least legally. But this wasn't an ending. It was the first line of a new story. I texted back, "Let's build something new." The court ruling had arrived earlier that morning in a thin white envelope. Not from the Whitmores, not with apologies or elaborately folded regrets, but from the federal office investigating trust misuse. Final determination closed. No appeal filed. They hadn't fought the loss. They hadn't replied at all. In the end, silence was how they exited, just like it was how they'd tried to erase me. But this time, it didn't hurt. It rang like relief. I returned home late in the afternoon. The sun dipped low over the lake, casting gold over everything. Inside, I sat at my desk, stared at the folder labeled Trust Files. Active and without hesitation, right-clicked. Delete. The dialog box asked if I was sure. Yes. And then it was gone. In its place, I opened a blank document, titled it carefully. Not out of habit, but intention. The Whitmore files reclaimed. Not for litigation, not even for Celeste. For the girl at the center. For the woman who never got to speak. For every quiet breath I took while they talked over me. And for the ones who'd come after me reading words they weren't supposed to inherit, but now could. Because silence doesn't end with noise. It ends when someone tells the truth out loud. And this time, I did. I didn't set out to be a symbol, I only wanted to be heard. But if my story speaks to something buried inside you, then I ask, don't look away. Not from injustice, not from quiet abuse disguised as care. Support those who choose truth, even when it costs them comfort. To those who've stood in shadows like I did, your silence isn't weakness, it's a seed. Plant it wisely. And to those who watched me fall and rise, thank you. Your eyes mattered. If you take anything from my fight, let it be this: freedom begins the moment you stop asking for permission.